In
Yeah.
a good way. Like Michael just dominated games spiritually, emotionally. You remember it, Rex. Like
Oh yeah.
you walk out there on the floor and you look down, because I was an opponent, many years, playing against Michael. You walked onto the floor back then and you look down and you saw him and you're kind of like, yeah, I don't think we're going to beat this guy. He held sway over the entire league. Everybody just was afraid of him. And so it was a different form of leadership. And you guys, I'm sure, you probably watched The Last Dance, and players talked about how hard he was on us in practice. That was the truth. He drove us hard. So, Timmy doesn't do that, and Steph doesn't do that. That's the way Michael did it. But it's a perfect example of there's no like one way of doing things, and Michael was hard on everybody, and he drove everybody, and he wouldn't settle for anything less than extreme effort and practice every day. So he just raised the bar every single day. And he was just incredible to play with, but, just totally different person.
The thing about Michael that was so, I felt, you obviously you had to play your hardest all the time against him. What I realized watching him play against other people in the league and against myself, there were times that, and you remember, Steve, what it was like when in high school, you would play and you were just so much better than the other team. Mike and the players on the other team, Michael did that to us at times in the NBA. Like
Yeah,
he
in the
was,
NBA. Yeah.
when he got that engaged, he could just, his hands were so big, he was playing a different game.
Mhm.
He was so long, so strong. And then
Yeah.
his elevation, and obviously the want inside to just kill you. He was a different, but I can only imagine he was different. I can only imagine what it must have been like a teammate playing and practicing against that every day.
Yeah, yeah, just the competitiveness in every drill. And back then, you remember, we practiced harder than they do
Yeah.
now, than we do now. And it's, it was different. And I think it's actually smarter now the way we go about our business, because you really need to keep guys prepared for games. And there's a reason that LeBron has played 19 years or whatever.
Right.
And back then, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, they played, I don't know, 12, 13. So we're much better these days at preserving our players.
Yeah.
But back then we had scrimmages pretty often, and he wanted to dominate every scrimmage. I mean, the trash talking in scrimmages was just relentless. And part of it was he just liked to express his dominance, and part of it was he was testing you every single day. But the games were like that too. I mean, and you could just feel it. You could just feel his presence, his dominance, and other teams were just kind of a little afraid.
When one man made the entire league bow down, you walked out there on the floor and you looked down and you just knew, we're not going to beat this guy. Michael just dominated games spiritually, emotionally. Everybody was afraid of him. Steve Kerr. When the man who once fought Michael Jordan in practice, who won championships beside him, and who was broken and rebuilt by him, says that Michael dominated games spiritually and emotionally. If you understand, we are not talking about an athlete. We are talking about a force of nature. Imagine stepping onto a court in Chicago in the mid-90 seconds. The crowd is roaring, the lights are blinding, and yet something feels heavy in the air. You look across the floor, and there he is, Jordan. No words, no smile, just standing there. And in that moment, you know, you're not entering a basketball game. You're walking into a ritual, one where every man bows before the God wearing number 23. Steve Kerr said it best. He held sway over the entire league. Everybody was afraid of him. The entire NBA, from stars to rookies, lived under Jordan's gravity. No one escaped it. No team stepped onto the court without the quiet fear of being consumed. Jordan didn't need to win to make you surrender. He only needed to arrive. One glance, calm, cold, emotionless, and the building would shiver. That wasn't confidence. That was the awareness of power. Kerr said Jordan dominated spiritually, emotionally. Exactly, he didn't win with muscle. He won with presence, belief, and aura. He made everyone around him feel small, simply by existing. Players from that era, fierce, proud, unbreakable, all admitted the same thing. When Jordan wanted to win, the universe bent, opponents trembled, teammates broke, and the game itself waited for his permission to end. That's what Steve Kerr meant by dominated spiritually. It wasn't religion. It was revelation. Jordan made people believe that he couldn't be beaten, believe that he never tired, believe that resistance was pointless. And that's the ultimate power of every true king, the power to make his enemies believe in their own defeat before the battle even begins. Jordan didn't need to yell. He didn't need to humiliate. He just had to appear. He just had to look, and reality around him shifted. Steve Kerr doesn't talk about Jordan like a storyteller from the past. He talks like a man who touched fire and still carries the burn. Because Jordan didn't just burn opponents, he scorched his own teammates if they couldn't withstand the heat. But that's what makes legends eternal. No one survived, Jordan unchanged. They emerged harder, colder, and fully aware that they had stood before something greater than human. And that's how Steve Kerr begins every memory of Michael Jordan. Not with stats, not with trophies, but with fear. A sacred fear. The kind shared by everyone who faced him. The kind with a name. Michael Jordan. Fear born not from words, but from presence. Steve Kerr once said, "Michael dominated games spiritually and emotionally." That wasn't a description, it was a diagnosis of power. Because what made people fear Michael Jordan was not what he said, it was the air around him. Some men lead with words. Some dominate with numbers. But Jordan, he changed the gravity of the room simply by walking into it. Kerr remembered it clearly. You could feel it. You could feel his presence, his dominance. Other teams were just a little afraid. No one needed to be told Jordan was there. You felt it the way you feel a storm before it hits, when the wind stops and the silence grows heavy enough to breathe fear into your chest. When Jordan entered an arena, every head turned instinctively, not because he boasted, not because he shouted, but because his energy was louder than any noise. He didn't need to intimidate you. He didn't need to scream. One look from him, calm, focused, surgical, and you started doubting yourself. That look said everything. I'm ready to win. You're not. And in that instant, tactics disappeared. Confidence dissolved. All that remained was fear. Not the loud, panicked kind, but the silent, suffocating kind you feel when you already know how the story ends. Even in practice, Kerr said, that energy never turned off. Jordan tested his teammates every single day, and just when you thought you'd passed the test, he'd push you further, harder into new territory. He drove us hard. He wouldn't settle for anything less than extreme effort every day. Steve Kerr. That was his way. Jordan didn't need to say, try harder. He just looked at you, and you understood. If you didn't give everything, you'd be burned alive by the fire in his eyes. In his era, every player knew facing Jordan wasn't just a game. It was a spiritual examination. A single lapse in focus, a single sigh, a single moment of weakness, and he'd see it, feel it, and tear you apart without mercy. Jordan didn't go looking for fear. He created it as a natural byproduct of his truth. Because to him, basketball wasn't just a sport, it was a ritual of existence. Every shot, every steal, every scream in practice was a declaration. I am the standard. I am the line. I am the reason everyone else must take this seriously. Kerr once said, he tested you every single day. That wasn't a test of strength, it was a trial of the soul. Because when you were near Jordan, you weren't just being pushed to practice harder, you were being pushed to either evolve or disappear. No one captured it better than Steve Kerr, the man who once fought Jordan in practice and later hugged him as a champion. He raised the bar every single day. He was just incredible to play with. Jordan didn't inspire people with speeches. He forced them to evolve by sheer proximity. That's a kind of leadership that can't be taught or faked. It's the kind that made both teammates and enemies tremble, because they all knew, if he's here, no one is allowed to be ordinary. The leadership of pain. He drove us hard. He wouldn't settle for anything less than extreme effort every day. Steve Kerr. There are leaders who inspire, and then there are leaders who ignite. Michael Jordan was the latter, the kind of man who didn't just demand excellence. He dragged it out of you, even if it tore you apart in the process. Steve Kerr remembers it clearly, the endless practices, the scrimmages that felt like wars, the trash talk that wasn't meant to humiliate, but to provoke evolution. Jordan didn't test you to prove he was better. He tested you to see if you belonged in his universe. In his world, good enough was an insult. Mediocrity wasn't failure, it was disrespect. Because Jordan's standard wasn't just high, it was sacred. He pushed every man around him to the edge not because he hated them, but because he refused to let them waste their potential. He would stare you down in practice as if the championship was on the line. He'd curse you out for missing a rotation, challenge your manhood for letting your guard down, and if you fought back, he'd love you for it. Kerr himself lived that moment. He stood up to Jordan once, in a heated practice that ended with punches thrown. But afterward, Jordan apologized and embraced him, because that fight wasn't about anger. It was initiation. Kerr had proved he could stand in the fire and not flinch. That was the paradox of Jordan's leadership. To play beside him was to be broken and rebuilt stronger than you thought possible. Every day was confrontation. Every drill was judgment. Every scrimmage felt like survival. But if you endured it, you didn't just earn his respect. You earned a place in the mythology. He tested you every single day, Kerr said. He just raised the bar every single day. Jordan's practices were louder than speeches, harder than games. He made the gym feel like a court of law, and he was both the prosecutor and the judge. There was no mercy, only standards. That's why those Bulls teams weren't just talented, they were tempered. Every player had been refined in the furnace of Jordan's expectations. He stripped them of excuses until all that was left was purpose. People on the outside saw arrogance. Those on the inside saw truth. Because Jordan's harshness wasn't cruelty, it was conviction. He didn't scream to demean you. He screamed to wake you up, to remind you that talent without obsession is wasted breath. Steve Kerr once said Jordan's presence raised the bar every day. But the real truth? Jordan was the bar, and if you couldn't reach it, he'd either lift you up to it or leave you behind. That's why his teammates feared him. That's why they loved him. Because deep down, they knew no one else could make them immortal. Jordan's leadership wasn't gentle. It was surgical. It cut you open, removed your weakness, and stitched you back together with discipline and rage. That's why men like Steve Kerr, Scottie Pippen, and Tony Kukoc still speak his name with both pain and pride. They didn't just win rings beside him. They were reborn beside him. Michael Jordan didn't teach greatness. He demanded it. And in doing so, he gave the world something no pep talk or highlight reel ever could. The understanding that pain is the price of immortality. The difference between great players and those who redefine reality. There's no one way of doing things. Timmy doesn't do that. Steph doesn't do that. But that's how Michael did it. Steve Kerr. There are many ways to lead men. Tim Duncan led with calm. Steph Curry leads with joy. LeBron James leads with empathy. But Michael Jordan, he led with fire. Where others build trust, he built pressure. Where others offered comfort, he offered confrontation. Jordan didn't create harmony. He created heat. And in that heat, greatness either melted or was forged. Steve Kerr, who later coached both Duncan and Curry, said it best. There's no one way of doing things. He's right, but what he didn't have to say was this. There's only one way to become a myth. Jordan's leadership was not sustainable for everyone. It was too sharp, too consuming, too absolute. You couldn't survive it unless you were built for war, because Jordan's world had no middle ground. You either burned with him or you burned because of him. That's what separated him from every other great who came after. He didn't just lead men. He reordered their reality. He didn't say, "Follow me." He said, "Catch me if you can." His teammates didn't look to him for comfort. They looked to him for permission to exist. Every glance from him was a judgment. Every word a verdict. If he smiled at you, it meant you had survived another trial. If he ignored you, it meant you had vanished. And yet those who endured him became legends. Not because he inspired them, but because he rebuilt them in his image. He gave them something deeper than motivation. He gave them the truth that greatness is not a feeling, but a requirement. That's why the Bulls weren't just a team, they were a religion. And Jordan was both God and preacher, unforgiving, divine, and terrifyingly human all at once. When Kerr coached the modern era men like Curry and Green, he saw leadership of a different breed, more patient, more humane, more sustainable, and he admired it. But even he knew the modern way creates great players. The old way created Jordan. Because there's a kind of excellence that can't coexist with comfort. There's a kind of dominance that requires sacrifice, not strategy. And Michael Jordan embodied it until it became spiritual law. Others lead through love. He led through truth. And truth, in its purest form, always hurts. Jordan wasn't just trying to win championships. He was trying to purify basketball, to burn away weakness, ego, and excuses. That's why players like Kerr, Pippen, and Rodman didn't just fear him. They worshipped him. Because deep down, they knew he wasn't coaching them toward success. He was dragging them toward immortality. There are many ways to lead, but only one way to make the world remember your name forever. Jordan didn't lead men to peace. He led them to transcendence. When others played basketball, Jordan played with their souls. When he got engaged, he was playing a different game. Steve Kerr. There are athletes who compete. And then there was Michael Jordan, a man who consumed competition. When others played basketball, Jordan played something higher, something darker. He didn't just want to beat you. He wanted to enter you, your rhythm, your heartbeat, your confidence, and destroy it from the inside out. Steve Kerr said, when he got engaged, he was playing a different game, and every man who ever faced him knew exactly what that meant. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a warning, because when Jordan locked in, when his eyes narrowed and the air around him changed, you could feel the floor tilt toward him. Shots that shouldn't fall did. Defenders who should have been fast looked slow. Time bent. Reality obeyed him. It wasn't arrogance, it was control. He bent the game to his will, and every man in the building, teammate, referee, or rival felt it. You didn't play against Jordan. You played inside his world, and he decided whether you could breathe there. His hands were enormous, like claws that could hold the game itself. His reach was suffocating. His elevation defied logic, but the real weapon was the thing you couldn't measure, his will. That endless, merciless hunger to break you, not because he hated you, but because he couldn't stand the idea of being human like everyone else. When Jordan got engaged, he wasn't in competition anymore. He was in possession. He took ownership of the moment, of your energy, of your fear, and you, no matter how talented, became part of his performance. Steve Kerr once described what it felt like to play during those times. You could just feel it. His presence, his dominance. It wasn't just intimidation, it was possession. You could sense his focus devouring the room. Every dribble, every breath became synchronized to his tempo. He wasn't just playing basketball, he was conducting it. And the worst part? He didn't have to talk. His silence was louder than any trash talk in the league. A smirk after your miss, a glance after his make. That was enough to bury your confidence 6 feet deep. Jordan didn't beat people with skill, he beat them with belief. He made you believe he was inevitable. He made you believe resistance was useless. And once you believed that, the game was already over. That's why his dominance felt spiritual. It wasn't physical supremacy, it was psychological warfare in divine form. He turned the court into a sanctuary, and himself into both priest and executioner. Every possession became prayer, every basket, revelation. He could just, his hands were so big, he was playing a different game. Steve Kerr, that different game wasn't about physics, it was about power. Jordan's game existed on a higher frequency, one powered by obsession, rage, and clarity so absolute that others mistook it for magic. But it wasn't magic. It was mastery. The kind so pure it frightened people. Because it proved something uncomfortable, that perfection might actually be possible, and that a mortal man had already found it. When others played basketball, Jordan played with their souls. He used fear as fuel, pain as purpose, and victory as validation. He didn't compete for points. He competed for dominion. And when he walked off the court, he didn't just leave with a win. He left with a piece of everyone who tried to stop him. The immortal legacy of Michael Jordan. Steve Kerr said it quietly, but the weight of his words echoed across generations. You could feel it. You could feel his presence, his dominance. That sentence was never about basketball. It was about a man who transcended his sport, a being who turned the simple act of competition into a spiritual experience. Jordan's legacy isn't just in 6 rings, or in records, or in the banners hanging in Chicago. It's in the invisible, the unmeasurable. It's in the silence before tip-off when everyone, even his opponents, could feel him. It's in the collective heartbeat of an arena that somehow beat in rhythm with his breath. It's in that look, calm, deadly, omniscient, that said without words, "You're about to remember who I am." Michael Jordan was never merely an athlete. He was an energy field, a living current of obsession and order. He existed at a frequency the rest of the world could only visit in dreams. He didn't just dominate basketball, he redefined human expectation. He taught the world that greatness isn't talent or opportunity. It's devotion so extreme it becomes divine. He showed that perfection doesn't live in statistics, but in the unrelenting refusal to ever settle for less than everything. Jordan was not here to play the game. He was here to purify it, to strip it of excuses, to turn pain into discipline, fear into focus, and victory into revelation. That's why players like Steve Kerr, who once faced his wrath and later shared his triumph, to still speak his name with a mix of awe and fatigue, as if describing an ancient storm that both destroyed and blessed everything in its path. Jordan burned through people. He didn't just win, he consumed. And yet, in consuming, he created. He forced everyone around him to evolve, to rise above weakness, to find faith in the impossible. That's why his presence lingers. Because greatness like that doesn't fade, it multiplies. Every player who touches a basketball today still moves within his gravitational pull. Every competitor who demands perfection is, knowingly or not, speaking his language. And that's what makes Jordan immortal. Not time, not trophy, but impact. He rewired the DNA of sport itself. He made excellence feel sacred, and in doing so, made us all worship the idea of being better than what we are. Michael Jordan didn't leave behind a legacy. He left behind a standard, a living reminder that greatness is not given, it's taken, bled for, and guarded with fury. And long after the lights dim, after the highlights fade and generations forget the scores, there will still be that image, the tongue out, the body suspended, the impossible made effortless, a man in midair, defying gravity, and for one perfect second, reminding humanity that gods can wear sneakers. He wasn't just the greatest of all time. He was the reason time itself had to measure greatness.